seen some of it today, which is that whether or not you need a marketing budget, a customer acquisition budget, in order to be able to acquire customers on Facebook. And while there's some debate as to whether or not you need a budget somewhere between $0 and $2 million, there's absolutely no debate that you have to find ways to make your game grow on Facebook, whether you add money or whether you add development or whether you add features. And Peter and Raf here are going to do a presentation on how you go about growing your game on Facebook. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you and let us know how you do it.
Cool. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here. My name is Raf Keustermans. I'm an independent consultant. I used to work at Playfish, where I was the global marketing director. And I'm presenting today together with Pete. Pete is the CEO of Brighter Option. Brighter Option is one of the leading companies basically that develop software and tools that help social game and other companies run, manage, and optimize campaigns on Facebook. So the next 20-25 minutes we're going to talk about how to grow your game on Facebook. It's going to be very marketing focused, obviously. So let's get started. Obviously, I don't think this is any breaking news for any one of you here in this room. The last couple of years, we've seen massive disruptive growth. Social gaming has really set the whole world of gaming upside down. A couple of years ago, we had around 300 million gamers, primarily on PC, console, also mobile feature phones. Today, we have more than 1 billion people playing games. That's quite an interesting statistic. Basically, if you look at just in 4 years, we had more than tripled the number of users. Obviously, this all coincided with the launch of Facebook as a games platform, right? So today, just on Facebook alone, more than 500 million people are using apps. Not just games, but primarily, we know a lot of those applications are games. Oops.
So we basically wanted to just introduce Facebook in basically 3 generations of how we've seen it progress from a marketing standpoint and a way to sort of grow the games. So for the first generation, you had sort of very rapid, cheap growth. So lots of the ability for the developers to push a lot of content to people without them sort of necessarily wanting to receive it. So games like sort of Pet Society were able to grow very quickly just by being able to push content out. And in the second generation, when the negative feedback came from the users on the platform that people don't necessarily want to have the content pushed on them, maybe they want to choose to share it, it slowed down a lot of the viral growth of the games and gave actually too much control almost to the users themselves. And games like Cityville were very much a part of that sort of generation. And now what we're seeing is the third generation of the Facebook sort of marketing ability really of the game. So opening up new viral channels and organic growth. Giving the sort of a shared control really between the actual games companies and the users themselves. So more sophisticated games are coming from this. And what we're actually finding out is the more subtle use of sort of social interaction and sort of better curated discovery. So the ability for games to subtly develop their organic elements. So games like, you know, EA Sim Social is a perfect example of that at the moment. So I'll hand back and I'll be back in a minute.
It is a bit complicated with the 2 clickers, so far so good. So if we look basically at the marketing life cycle of a social game, there's 3 important phases, right? One is obviously the launch, and we see 2 trends emerging. Historically, most social game companies have always used the minimum viable product approach, right? You launch a small game, see how it goes, get some users in, and you take it from there. We see actually a different trend emerging. I'll talk about that in a second. The other most important part is how do you actually grow your game, right? I think the most crucial part is move fast. Really leverage the momentum, leverage the buzz that you have. It's very difficult to grow games once they are mature. What we see today, actually the current generation, as Pete just mentioned, is that games peak much faster than they used to do. Like we have seen the 2 graphs, basically Pet Society, one of the first big social games, and Cityville. If you look at Pet Society, the game reached its peak roughly a year or 12 months after it was launched. If you compare that with Cityville and most of the other games these days, they peak very, very fast. They are really fueled by aggressive cross-promotion, aggressive marketing and so on. Typically these games, they peak 3 to 8 weeks after launch, no longer months, but weeks. The last phase, most important, is how once you reach your peak, you obviously need to manage to retain and engage your users. An interesting trend that I've seen myself at Playfish and also many other clients I work with is that even if you lose an audience after your peak, there are some games that lost up to 80% of their users, say a couple of months after reaching the peak. that doesn't necessarily mean that you're also going to lose your revenue. A lot of the users that will churn out are newbies, very casual players. Typically what happens is that the engaged user, the spenders, the whales, they will stick around. I've seen a couple of games that actually reached an all-time high in revenue with 20% of the audience at their peak. Talking about customer acquisition, there's two main phases. Basically, once your game is live, it's all about land grab. Focus on the volume, and obviously also make sure that you get the right people to your game, right? It's about focusing on quality, but less focusing on ROI. It's about making sure that you actually, as I said before, leverage the momentum, leverage the buzz that your game has on the platform. Once you actually achieved a certain level of maturity, once you actually hit your peak, the really focus should shift on ROI. Focus on making sure that you can actually get a good margin on your investment. I would typically say, and obviously this depends game by game, country by country, but 40% should be an achievable goal for an ROI on investment once your game is mature. Facebook, as we know, as Facebook as a marketing platform is auction-based, and auctions, they punish scale. That's why there's a direct correlation between volume and ROI. If you really want to achieve millions and millions and millions of installs, it's going to be difficult to get ROI. Also because we know social gaming is all about understanding, reading data, especially with customer acquisition, which is very, very capital intensive. It's crucial that you keep an eye on your key metrics. Right, oops. Right. So when we basically launch a game, we talk about seeding. There's two main schools of thought that are currently emerging. As I said before, traditionally within social gaming, if you can talk about traditionally in such a young industry, people have always used the minimum viable product approach. You launch a game which is not ready yet. You basically get a couple of users into the game, either through cross-promotion, organic, or through some small acquisition budgets. You try to understand what these users are doing, how are they behaving, how are they monetizing, what's the retention. You basically iterate from there. You start making small changes, add more content. What we currently see, especially with the big players like EA and Zynga, is that they basically almost move towards a traditional marketing approach that we've seen in console games and also movie launches. We have these really big coming soon campaigns, announcement months before to really build buzz for a game. And also these games, they are almost ready when they go live. They're no longer minimum viable products. They are basically the final polished product. This is quite an interesting approach because I think most smaller social gaming studios that don't have the budget that EA and Zynga have, they obviously can't follow this approach. I think the risk for us as an industry is that the approach basically drives certain consumer expectations. We already see today that social gamers no longer have the same patience. If a game is basically a minimum viable product, we basically see that users no longer accept it. They basically expect a very high level of polish at the beginning, at the launch of a game. This is actually one of the most hyped myths, if you want, within social gaming, viral and organic growth. We talked a little bit about it already. To get a game to grow virally, you really have to start thinking about virality at a concept phase. It's very hard to launch a game and basically add viral features afterwards. You really have to think, when you think about your game, how can we add features that help people invite their friends? The K factor, the virality coefficient for most social games these days is around 0.25. That basically means if you get 100 people to your game, you can expect another 25 to be added through virality. These days, it is very, very exceptional to have a game that only grows organically or through virality. Don't bet on that. Don't expect that your game will be the one exception. You should look at virality as an accelerator for growth and not as the main engine for growth. Organic traffic, it's usually a myth. In most cases today, organic basically means badly tracked virality. People don't understand where users are coming from, they call it organic. Hopefully, with the changes that Facebook announced recently, and Peter's going to talk about that more in detail, we can actually get to a point very soon where there is genuine organic growth in social gaming. So the main driver, and I'm sure that all of you will maybe not like this message, but the main driver for growth in social gaming is paid advertising. If there's one key takeaway, is spend wise and spend fast. A typical launch campaign, or most launch campaigns for successful social games, are very, very concentrated, 3 to 6 weeks. It is very, very hard to get an acceptable customer acquisition cost for mature games. Once your game is over the peak, it is very hard to get it to grow again. In terms of the approach that I would advocate that you would use, start with Facebook advertising directly. Because you basically can control whatever you want. You can control, you can do a lot of testing, creative and otherwise. You can scale up, scale down your spend. Once you understand what works and what doesn't work, it might make sense in some cases to look at alternative channels. There's a lot of affiliate and ad networks out there. They might be able to play a role in your marketing mix, but not from day one. They're very hard to control, as we all know. Social density is quite an interesting concept. Basically what it means is it's the extent to which users within your game are connected. Not just connected as with our friends on Facebook, but also do they have a similar game experience together. If I'm level 2 and you're level 15, it's going to be difficult to have the same, to share a lot of things. Maybe the gifts that I send you are not very relevant and vice versa. So we know that games with a high social density have a very good retention and also monetization rate, because there's an element of competitiveness typically. How you can actually try to get social density with marketing campaigns is, there's a couple of tips, and obviously this is not gospel, right? I mean, it's about testing, it's about understanding data, but keep your campaigns short. That's I think one of the key areas that you should really focus on. Don't have campaigns going on for months and months and months. Keep them a couple of weeks, keep them very condensed. Also try to think, what can I do in terms of segmentation to make sure that the segments I have a high propensity that people within those segments know each other. Focus on age. Don't have campaigns going from 18 to 65. Focus on users that are within an age bracket of say 5-6 years typically. Also, obviously, geography. People who live in the same city, in the same region, is a high propensity they know each other compared to like nationwide campaigns. Relationship status. People who are married, typically, and of course there are exceptions, right? Typically hang out less with single people than and vice versa. Facebook allows you to target this, right? Facebook allows you to focus only on singles, only on married people. The same goes for people who went to university, etc. So these are a couple of things you should really consider when building segments to make sure that you, as much as possible, drive high social density in your game. Hand it over back to Pete now.
So the question really is why is Facebook still the platform to build on? And the truth of the matter is the sheer scale that it actually offers. With 800 million users in over 200 countries, you've got an audience ready to distribute your content to. And with active users, as Raf mentioned at the start, 500 million people actively engaging with apps every month. They're there and they're waiting. The other side of things is that if you look at the rich user data that you can actually attain from the players of your games, there's no other platform that you can actually get that information and then use it in a marketing perspective. You're talking about targeting people on a demographic basis. The understanding of your audience then just helps you advertise much more efficiently. And having Facebook credits, having a single currency, although initially when it was introduced there was a little bit of pushback, the truth of the matter is actually having a single currency will actually give a much more frictionless monetization of games. People can jump from game to game without having to reinvest all of their time and money into buying different sorts of currencies. And if you look at what Facebook has recently announced, opening up new viral and organic channels has kind of put the gaming community back at the forefront of their platform, allowing you to organically grow as you move. So they're talking about the organic and viral channels. I mean, as again, I mentioned in sort of 3 different generations, the original side of things, the app developers were very much in control, and they were happy just to put a lot of information out. A lot of spamming in effect was happening, which in turn started to affect the user experience on Facebook. And as soon as the people on Facebook, the users, start to complain, they generally listen. And what therefore happened is they passed all the control to the users. And so it was up to the user to then to share and invite friends. And it basically started to reduce the viral responses and started to stop the viral growth as once was being achieved. But what we're now seeing in this generation is that basically sharing between the users and the developers for pushing information. Things like the real-time games ticker on the right-hand side of Facebook shows you a good way to actually discover content that you maybe otherwise wouldn't. And basically synchronous discovery as well, in terms of knowing exactly when your friends are playing the games online, will actually allow you to jump into the game at that point and play against your friends. So they're actually trying to encourage what Raf was saying about social density. If you know your friends playing it, you're probably more likely to then quickly jump back in and make sure they don't get too far ahead. So you've got the competition element is much more there. Things like re-engagement, using the bookmarks are encouraging when in terms of you're trying to actually re-engage the people that have got there. And having new discovery stories means that it's up to the developers to structure their content in a way that you're actually using those stories and touch points in games to actually understand when people want to understand where their friends are in certain places. So the viral response and rates should actually start to be on the increase now that this generation is using it. So Facebook basically has been able to do this simply because they've actually been working on their algorithms to understand what people actually want to hear and when. So curating and ensuring that the content is relevant is probably one of the biggest elements. So understanding when you build your game, when these touch points should come, will determine. So you have to also therefore be aware and be careful about how much of this you try and push. Because if it works, then Facebook will encourage the sharing. But if it doesn't, it will shut down. So you have to kind of find a nice balance between what's right for the users and what's right for you. And the same as with paid channels. The development is, considering it's only been around since 2007, the change in how that Facebook can actually be advertised upon is phenomenal. Back in the first generation, it was very much standard display advertising with quite limited targeting. And then it moved into things like adding social context to adverts. So if Peter's playing this game, then my friends are more likely to use it. So kind of using the element of advocacy started to really show increasing engagement with adverts. And at that stage, they started to introduce more targeting parameters. So being able to target on people's location and what people were demonstrating an interest in basically makes it a more channeled advertising opportunity. And what we're seeing now is that they're actually introducing a lot more ad units into Facebook, things like sponsored stories. And these are an ad unit which basically allows you to amplify actions that people are doing on the platform. And certainly in the next generation, which isn't quite out yet, you'll be able to amplify actions of people within games. So for instance, I've just sent a gift to a friend, then it would actually allow me to put that into an ad unit and amplify the message that we're trying to achieve. Again, encouraging people to engage with the adverts. So amplifying specific stories within the storytelling is very, very important. And again, just continually adding more and more targeting opportunities. Things like topic targeting, broad interests. You can actually target people on Facebook now that like playing social games. So you don't have to worry about inserting every social game you can possibly think of into the interest targeting. Facebook are working hard to make your advertising work. And even down to things like the zip code. You can advertise that granular on Facebook now. So managing these is always going to be quite difficult. So having the reason that Facebook opened up the Ads API was so companies like myself and many others in the space can actually open up software to make the management a lot simpler. And you can start to use insight data now as well to understand which kind of users are best engaged with your game and therefore use them to advertise to. So what we're starting to see is the paid and organic is now being much more stringently linked within the Facebook platform. So if we look at tracking very quickly, once you actually get people to play the game, the key really is to understand which adverts are driving the best players. Raf talks about the big launch and then obviously looking for ROI. So trying to understand exactly which adverts, which demographics are actually providing the best and most engaged users is something that you have to do to basically grow the game efficiently. So it's not just about installs anymore, it's about what happens beyond the install. And so having a tracking pixels throughout your games being attributed back to an individual advert allows you greater control over how you're spending your money. And in our software, this is basically how it would look. So we'd have 3 levels of conversion, and then each of those conversion levels will be pushed back against an individual advert. You might have 1,000 adverts in a campaign, but what you wish to know is which of those adverts is driving the most engaged users. So tips. Some of these are kind of blindingly obvious, but we still see a lot of people making these mistakes. When you grow a game on Facebook, and if you're not used to advertising on Facebook, ensure that you exclude anyone that is currently playing or has downloaded your game. One of the things that people do is they forget to do this, and naturally Facebook will serve ads to people that are already playing because they're the ones that are most likely to click on the ads. So excluding new players for acquisition is key. And simple things like the calls to action. Don't overcomplicate the creative. Simple, calls to actions in terms of play now or click here actually have a profound effect. We have to forget that we're kind of experts in the marketing realm. Well, I say experts, we work in the digital space, so we understand that. But the people that are playing these games aren't necessarily experts in this, so they will actually respond better to being told what to do. And certainly, one of the key things is learn about the newsfeed, learn about the sponsor story structures, so you can get the most out of when you're actually building your game. And there's so many documented stories and documented blogs on different ad units within Facebook. To read up on these will actually help you run better campaigns. And then finally, using the actual paid adverts to re-engage your current users is a great way to make sure that you complete the circle, because as you know, once you've got to a certain size, it's actually maintaining that user base that's key. And you can use paid adverts to just advertise to the people that are in. So in the tip at the start, although you can exclude, you can also just advertise to people that are playing your games. So it gives you that ability to not waste any of your adverts on people that aren't currently playing. So that's kind of it, really. So that's it. Hope it was useful.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Raf. Questions?
So could you compare viral channels on Facebook? Which works most better?
Sorry, can you repeat that? Sorry.
Compare the viral channels on Facebook about which work better.
Yeah, so 90% of all viral growth comes through gifts and invites, right? I think it depends a bit on the game. It's kind of hard to say, like a research management game will have a different dynamic than, for example, a poker game, right? So, but those are the two main drivers. Typically, wall posts don't really function that well in terms of viral growth. I think it's more like an indirect thing because it creates visibility, but typically we see that for most social games it's primarily gifts and invites.
There is a segment in Facebook games which are not actually games but rather social activities like posting postcards or birthday gifts or something like this. And what do you think is the size of this segment? Is it profitable at all? Or, for instance, at this conference, I'm not hearing about it too much. So what do you think?
Oh, it's very hard. I don't obviously have insights in every single application. I think most of these very simple, straightforward birthday cards and horoscopes and very simple quiz, they don't monetize very well. Most developers actually use them as part of their strategy to drive an audience, to basically, because they're relatively easy in order to build an audience, which you can afterwards cross-promote to more games with a higher ARPU, right?
Do you have a rule of thumb for the cost of one monetizable gamer on Facebook?
It's so different country by country, game by game, right? I mean, if you have a very successful poker game, you can obviously spend easily $2 and you will still make a profit. If you have a very simple, like Me Too research management game, like a Vil clone and so on, it's probably going to be difficult to make more than $1. And again, it depends, right? If you're focused on Turkey or Indonesia, you will have a complete different view than if you're focused on the States. So it is very, very hard. But it's I've rarely seen. Sorry. This is lifetime value, right? Lifetime, yeah. And obviously, lifetime value for most games it's less than 12 months, right? There are exceptions, like Zynga Poker being the most obvious one, but.